This Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Collective. At The Collective, we believe that justice isn't optional, it's actually sacred. That's why we're building a growing library of progressive resources, connecting you with queer and Black-owned businesses, linking to books that challenge the status quo, and delivering content that empowers you to resist fascism with clarity and compassion. So join the movement. Support the mission. Visit The Collective, that's QUOLLECTIVE.com, The Collective, to learn more and get involved.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of This Is Not Church. I've messed my intro up, so I don't even know. I can't get in my normal thing I say. Welcome back. Remember when we first started, John, and we didn't know how to even introduce the show? It was like, hey, everybody, this is not. That doesn't sound weird. This is. And we we mumbled through like 50 of them. And I'm still doing it. How many years later? 3.5 years later. But this is the podcast, guys, that we call This Is Not Church, because if it was church, you would have left by now. That's what I was hoping to say. That's our tagline. And I also like to throw in the fact that Bethany would actually try to convince you to stay because she's a good person. John and I are trying to lead people astray. Bethany's trying to keep them in the fold.
Putting walls up and everything.
That's right.
Like a real protective sort of place. Yeah.
Boxing them in, but in a good way.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody loves to be in a box. So why not?
My cat loves to be in a box. Why wouldn't humans?
Yeah.
But anyway, as always, you're joined by myself, Nat Turney, and my brother John Turney, and our always loquacious and I was going to say lascivious, but that doesn't work. It might.
You'll never know.
Lascivious. Licentious. Are you also licentious?
It's possible.
Bethany Shea. Say hi, guys. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
Say what's up, Bethany.
What's up, Nat?
Yeah. See, you walked up to the line, turned around, flipped me the bird, and said no.
Yeah.
That far and no farther. But we're glad you're here. But as always, we have an amazing guest. So let's just get past my yammering and let's get on to the good stuff. So let me introduce our guest today. Gloria Beth Amodeo is her name. Her fiction, nonfiction interviews and reviews have appeared in Publishers Weekly, The Literary Review, Carrier Pigeon, American Atheist, and How Journal, where Mary Gateskill, I probably butchered that name, selected a short story of hers as the winner of a fiction contest. Gloria received her MFA in creative writing from the New School and currently works at an advertising agency in New York City. In 2020, she was featured in the documentary People You May Know on Amazon Prime, where she discussed her experiences with Campus Crusade for Christ and how the organization is now using big data to convert vulnerable college students. God's Ex-Girlfriend is her debut work, and she lives in Brooklyn, New York. I don't know if that's still true, but I think we discussed a second ago. That's probably not true, but welcome to the show, Gloria. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Sometimes we read through the bios and go, oh, there's a couple things in there that maybe not be. Still, but it doesn't really matter. We're not trying to dox anyone and say where people live. If you wouldn't mind, just give us your current address and maybe your social security number.
Phone number, all of it, several different emails.
If you have your blood type handy, that'd be great. That'll help with our marketing. Anyway, hey, we're glad that you're here. I'm super excited to talk about Campus Crusade for Christ because I got some things to say.
Goodness.
I'm curious about your experiences with that. But we normally like to start off our conversations asking people a little bit about their background and maybe their faith journey. So if any of that you'd like to share with us, that would be fantastic to just kick it off.
Yeah, sure. I was raised kind of as my father liked to call himself a cafeteria Catholic. You know, my father was raised in like an Italian-German household and my mother was extremely French-Canadian, and it was just Catholicism. It was just, we just did it. That's what they did.
Sure.
And so I grew up going to Catholic church. I always had to sit in the front row because my father wanted to shake hands with the priest at the times when that happens. Like it was just a very, it wasn't like a hyper religious upbringing, but it was one in which, we knew the name of Jesus. We knew who God was. We knew basic general things about the Bible. But it was, I kind of grew up being like, I think that, by the time I was a teenager, I was like, the Bible's a load of crap. I hate it. It starts like I was very much in that camp. And then when I was in college, I converted to evangelical Christianity, which was not a thing I ever thought I would ever do, ever in my life. But, organizations like Campus Crusade have a way. And if you have a vulnerability, they know how to exploit that. They're like, it's like, somebody once called it a well-oiled machine. It's a very, I felt that was an apt way of putting it. So I converted and I was evangelical for 7 years. And then I began to sort of wake up out of it. It felt like I was waking up out of a dream in a lot of ways. And that was about a 2-year process that was really hard and really lonely and really scary at times. And then now I'm here and I'm an adult who's not an evangelical, and I had to rebuild my life and rebuild my friendship circles and rebuild my mind and sort of, come back to my family and come to understand them again and myself on the other side of it. And I would describe myself as agnostic now, kind of like, I don't know, I'm very interested in woo-woo things, but not that interested. Like, I listen to stories about aliens and ghosts, but I'm not necessarily like, I believe there are aliens. But I think that it's really fun. And I think astrology is really fun. All the stuff that was forbidden is really fun now to play around with it. But it's also fun to not really feel like I have to believe in anything. It's a relief.
I found a lot of peace in that myself. And I was always warned, of course, in the evangelical world, everything you've just said is heretical to the nth degree, right? Yep. But you always were warned that, or maybe say it this way: the caricature that was painted of agnostics and or atheists was, they must be miserable. They just don't believe in anything. And the further I get away from that stuff and the more people that I get to know who live in those camps, no, they're not. For a lot of them, whatever anxiety religion caused, and it's a lot, all of a sudden that gets lifted. But also it goes against, it's sort of antithetical to what we had been raised to believe, that not without God, but without religion, without these practices, without these things, that we would suddenly find ourselves purposeless. And I'm actually finding myself to be purposeless, actually, in the grand sense, as though there's not some grand scheme for my life that I have to either live up to or not. My purpose is just to live and love the people around me and do as much good and as little harm as I possibly can. And I find a lot of peace in that. Is that kind of where you find yourself as well?
Yeah. The simplicity of that is a really powerful thing. Yeah. It's like, it's the only job I have right now is to just be here and to, and to love everybody really well and to do the best I can. And when I find I'm not doing the best I can, to try to do better next time. The purposelessness, or I guess it's a repurposing in a way, a healthy repurposing. It's really beautiful. It's weird because I didn't even grow up again in the evangelical world, but I still had that fear that if I left, that my whole life would just go to shit. It's so strange how, again, I grew up in a really, essentially an agnostic world, like a cafeteria Catholic world where we didn't necessarily believe in anything. We picked one thing that we liked and, threw away the rest of it or whatever. And I still believed it. And I would see other people who were living perfectly fine lives outside of it, but I was still convinced that those lives were not good enough and that the life that I was going to have based on this faith system was going to be so, so much better. And it was confusing because it wasn't. But if you just keep doing this, if you do this better, it'll get better. And it just never did.
You said how towards the beginning of our conversation, you were talking about how you're kind of going more woo-woo in some ways. But in the beginning of your book, you also talk about like the angels and the experiences with divinity that's outside of the norm, I guess, in some ways. So do you feel like you were kind of positioned to see spirituality outside of the constructs that you were handed?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, my mother is such a, interesting spiritual person in a lot of ways. Like, I spoke about in my book how my mom told me from a young age that she had seen her brother. after he died, and he died as a child of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was 11 when he died, and my mother was 7, and she said that she saw him walk into her classroom and he was completely see-through and sat on the teacher's desk and just mouthed words to her, and she couldn't actually understand anything he was saying, but she could just feel inside of herself that he was okay. And she always carried that belief with her. To this day, she carries that belief with her. And yeah, so it's like my mom's got like a little extra something, and one of my sisters does too. It's like just like the veil is a little thinner for them, maybe. And so, yeah, I think I was definitely positioned to believe in something outside of what I could just see. And in maybe some ways that made me even a little more susceptible to what ended up happening to me in college. I'm not sure, even though, and it was actually really heartbreaking when I was in college, because when they first convert you, they don't tell you what you're going to have to give up. They feed that to you really, really slowly. And that's, of course, very strategic. And, it's like, we got to get your life in order with us before we got to put ourselves at the center before we get you to give up everything else. And yeah, it wasn't until about 2 years in that I realized I wasn't supposed to believe in ghosts anymore.
Even though you're supposed to believe in the Holy Ghost. That
is okay, but every other ghost is a demon.
What about Casper? He was friendly. I mean, come on, man. But every time I hear this, and I hear this from a lot of folks, it reminds me of again, dating myself to an old 90s movie called Death Becomes Her. Bruce Willis. And anyway, but these women drink a potion to become immortal, right? And so they all drink the potion, and when they're done, the lady who gives them the potion says, "Okay, and now the bad news." And they're all like, "Now the bad news? Like, it's too fucking late." And the bad news was they were immortal, but they couldn't heal. So the rest of their lives, anyway, it's a strange movie. You should watch it. It's actually pretty good.
That's a good analogy, though, for what that's like, now the bad news.
Yeah. And honestly, the more that I study, I've gotten really interested in cults and what some people call, I think the new term for cult is high demand religion, right? I hear that a lot in like Mormon circles, because they don't want to call themselves a cult, but they will admit to being a high demand religion. So Scientology fits in that mold, Jehovah's Witnesses to some extent, but they do the same thing, and they convert you with all the good stuff. They tell you, and then they slowly roll out the weird shit, like after you've already committed to it. And they go, well, one little, some of their more secret stuff, some of their more, alarming things get rolled out later. But was it Campus Crusade for Christ that got you in college, or was it another like parachurch organization?
It was definitely Campus Crusade. It was in particular one woman that got me. And I was, a very confused person in general, I think, at that point in time. But yeah, she got me, I think, through the tactics of Campus Crusade, but also her and I just probably would have been friends anyways, even if there wasn't all of this like religious stuff happening. And so, yeah, they just kind of like, she came to me and knew that this was probably a possibility, and she just employed all of the tactics.
So for those who maybe not have had this experience, or maybe what kind of tactics are those? Can you quantify the kinds of things they did that were maybe nefarious? Or I mean, obviously on their face they're not, right? But
yeah. Well, so Campus Crusade espouses two different kinds of evangelism. They espouse relational evangelism, and then initiative evangelism. Initiative evangelism is, the people who will show up on your doorstep like a Jehovah's Witness, and be like, go over this text with you and stuff, and just kind of approach you out of nowhere off the street. And that is not really very fruitful in terms of converting anyone. That I've come to believe is more for the person who's trying to do the converting. It's to cement them more in the lifestyle. It's because you kind of humiliate yourself a little bit to do it. And like, the more you humiliate yourself, the more likely you are to stay in the group, because it's just like, it's a tactic in itself. Whereas what I fell into was relational evangelism. And that is essentially it's the long game. It was a process of, I met somebody who I connected with a lot. She felt like home to me in so many ways. And I had just started college and was definitely looking for home and looking for who I was going to be in the rest of my life and who my friends were going to be and what my world was going to be like. And I met her, and over time, and we got really close really quickly. And then over time, she just started dropping more and more things about her beliefs. That's called planting seeds. And then she tended to them. She just kind of like grew the garden. She watered them. And she, would plant seeds such as, yeah, I go to church. My dad's a pastor. Okay, that's one seed. Totally innocuous. Why would I dislike somebody for being a pastor's kid? Like, why would I ever do that? Why could we not be friends with that? And then it would be like, I'm actually, I have this group of friends who don't believe what I believe, but we're all really close still. Okay, cool. That's normal, right? And then, actually, I'm afraid that they're all going to hell. I believe they're all going to hell. And that's really hard for me because I love them a lot. Well, I don't believe all these people are going to hell. That's really sad for you to believe that, but also really lovely that you care for them so much and you believe this and you really want to save them. But you're just really misinformed, like you're really misled. And then as time went on, I started seeing her, I don't know, I had this love for her that she also, I felt like kind of grew in a way. Like we got really, really close and then she started pulling away. And that was really hard for me because she had become my best friend in this like first year of college. And, all of a sudden your best friend is kind of like, like not calling you as much, not texting you as much, like it hurt. And I didn't really have the mental capacity, like, the whole developed frontal lobe thing. I feel like my frontal lobe was just like not there at that point in time. I didn't understand that, if somebody's doing this, like maybe they're not, as I would now, I might be a little hurt, but I would be like, they're not really worth my time. But back then I was like, well, I want to get closer to her. Why is she pulling away from me? Maybe it's because I'm bad. Maybe it's because there's something wrong with me. I want to be better because she's so cool. And the thing is, I had so many self-confidence issues and she didn't have any. She thought that she was beautiful, thought that she was great, didn't really care if anybody said anything mean to her. It just didn't affect her. Everything just rolled off her shoulders. And that wasn't me. I took everything to heart. She always said that she was logical and I was emotional. And I wanted to become more logical like her because I just didn't want to walk around hurt all the time like I was. And so, yeah, she felt like this like key to becoming a functioning human being to me. And she planted those seeds that I could tolerate and then started feeding me more and more of the stuff that was kind of like a little like batshit crazy as time went on. But she fed it so slowly that my brain didn't even catch up with it. Like she went from 0 to 5 and then to 10 and then to 15 instead of 0 to 100. And that's what relational evangelism is. It's, giving it to you in little doses so that your brain can get used to it, but also giving you something to value and something you want to hold on to. And for me, that was the example that she set, and it was her friendship. And I also think that I had a crush on her and did not understand that at that age. I didn't understand, like I didn't grow up around people who were openly bisexual. I knew like one lesbian like my entire life, and it was my cousin, and I barely knew her. And, I didn't feel like I had anything to do with her really. And so I didn't understand what I was feeling or what I was experiencing and why I was jealous when her boyfriend would come over. I didn't get it, I just knew that I had these thoughts and feelings, and it was very emotionally complicated for me. So it's different. It's probably different for every person, but for me, that was how it has some of the same basic principles, I think, in terms of relational evangelism. But it was, for me, it was, I think, highly emotionally charged.
It sounds like she was somebody who could have created opportunities like this in all sorts of circumstances where she wanted to be adored and valued and looked up towards. And this Christian ministry gave her the opportunity to do it even more rapidly, where there was even more adoration, which has to be really difficult to navigate when you're a student in college and away from home for the first time and trying to find a friendships and family. And I'm sure you did experience a lot of good connection over it as well. But then in the same time, there's like this indoctrination that's happening. And then also the guilt of not continuing forth. If maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but the expectation to evangelize like the others were evangelizing, like that's an expectation on the faith perspective. That must have been really hard.
Yeah. I did end up getting to that point, definitely, of evangelizing and trying to, do to other people what she had done to me, because it was a great example of something. And also, again, like you said, the adoration. I think everybody wants to be adored within their community. Everybody wants to be known, and everybody wants cared for. And I understood once I was, fully entrenched in the movement, that this was not only an expectation of me to evangelize and that I needed to be doing both initiative and relational evangelism, but it also was it was my key to living a really good life, because it was the people who went out there and shared their faith that, became known as like, awesome. It was so funny back then. It was awesome. The word was always awesome. Awesome. Oh, she's awesome. She's solid. She's all of these solid, so solid in her faith. Yeah. And I wanted to be that. I wanted to be awesome and solid. And I wanted all of those things. I wanted to be seen and known and adored. And, it's sort of it's very transactional in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for sure.
These things that maybe don't feel that good, you're going to reap these benefits, and then you're going to marry someone awesome and have awesome kids and be loved in your awesome world forever. So, yeah.
Did you experience other communities while you were in college that went beyond Campus Crusade?
I did. Yeah. I was a theater major.
Okay.
So I had the theater kids that I was, eventually, as, time went on, she convinced me that I needed to be evangelizing to them again in the way that she had evangelized to me. So I started trying to do the same things, felt quite successful in some areas. But yeah, it's funny because when I first got to college and, I wasn't evangelical and I wasn't Christian and I was auditioning for plays and getting roles, everything felt really fraught and really competitive and really just like, oh, there's all these people and this person slept with that person. And oh my God, what if no one ever wants to sleep with me? Or what if they do? And it was all very, hard, again, with no frontal lobe. It felt really difficult to navigate and really, really scary. But then once I was in her world and I was, espousing the beliefs that she espoused, all of a sudden everything became so much simpler. It was like, well, you're not supposed to sleep with anybody, so that's totally off of the table. You're supposed to be married to them, so you're going to live this much simpler, more interesting life where you kind of like sit on the side and you watch all of these people do their theater kid things, which is just be an insane person. I don't know. Theater kids are amazing. And if my kids are theater kids, I'll be like, that's awesome. And also be careful. Careful with yourself. Be careful at 9 p.m. at, Friendly's drinking those milkshakes.
I miss Friendly's so much. Sorry. You reminded me of my East Coast days.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm in the East Coast. I was in college in New Jersey when I got, converted to all this stuff. So we were going to Applebee's and doing half-priced appetizers at 10 p.m.
Heck yeah.
After our career group. Yeah.
Man.
The best. Those boneless buffalo wings.
Oh man, good times. Good times.
I know. So good. But yeah, so I did have other communities and I had that theater community, but everything at first it was really scary and really hard to sort of wrap my head around. And, and I think, I don't know, I'm like, was I just a really confused scaredy cat of a kid like when I was in college? Or is everybody like that? And people are just putting on different fronts. And I'm just so, I just don't really have much of a poker face or much of a filter. And so maybe I just came into this, world and I had a hard time navigating it genuinely, and I wanted to be genuine. And then, evangelicalism and Kate and Campus Crusade gave me these tools to navigate it in a genuine manner, but from the sidelines, so I didn't have to feel too much when I was in it. So,
what made you decide to name your book God's Ex-Girlfriend? How did you get to that title, and what was that story like for you?
Well, I actually made a list of titles and I showed them to my, at that time, boyfriend and now husband. And he picked that one. He was like, that's the one. He had read the book so many times. Really been my first editor on it. And the reason that he picked that, and as we talked about, I was like, why are you drawn to that one? Why is that the most interesting to you? And I remember him saying that it was that this is a book all about relationships, ultimately. It's all about relationships. And that's what evangelicalism is really all about, and what, the book kind of like exposes it to be, and what it would tell you it's about. It's about relationships, a relationship with Jesus and a relationship with God. But for me, I never quite got to that altar. I never quite married Jesus in the way that you're supposed to as a young single woman in the evangelical faith. I always kind of was just dating, but still very committed, extremely committed, and would have considered myself married to Jesus. But at the end of the day, it didn't go as far as it could have. I didn't get to the point that I think the movement really wanted me to get to, which is get married within this movement, have children within this movement. It's going to be that much harder. It's like if you have a spouse that still really believes and you don't, it's going to be that much harder for you to leave. And that's what we want. Like, we don't want to lose these numbers. And so, yeah. So that's kind of where, kind of how that came up. And yeah, I really felt like I was in a true relationship with God, but we never quite, this version of Jesus and I never quite got married. I could never get myself to that point, even though I really, really wanted to.
Oh, it sounds in a similar path of like deconstruction. It sounds like breaking up with God is something that most people need to do at least one point in their life. Break up with the version of God that we came to believe and cling on to a different version, or maybe there's just no version at all. But it's like it seems like it's part of what it means to grow up as people, especially if you grow up in the faith. And, as children, we're such black and white thinkers that when we realize that nothing is really that black and white, it can be really off-putting.
Yeah. And really scary. Again, when you don't have that frontal lobe, it's real scary. It's really, really scary.
Yeah. And do you have that breakup conversation with God? Like, look, it's not you.
It's not you. It's me.
It's me. Yeah. You're cool. Uh-huh. You're great.
What's funny is I think that I definitely, and I wonder how other people, have gone about it in their own minds, but I definitely had sort of a slow fading out.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember going in my journals and being like, I still believe in you, but not quite in this way. In fact, I think my idea of you is expanding into something way bigger, and that's so cool, and blah, 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 blah. And actually, I don't believe in this like primary doctrine of salvation through faith alone. I think that you can have salvation, and faith without even knowing you necessarily have faith. So it was like the deconstruction was kind of like, going into these really like heretical territories, when it comes to how like evangelicalism sees itself and, believes hereticalness to exist. But yeah, I definitely had that sort of slow breakup before I just realized, actually, I never want to go to church again.
Yeah.
And
I had that thought, and I was the pastor. I was like, I'm standing up in front of a congregation going, I just don't want to do this anymore. I just don't even think. Yeah, I don't recommend, by the way, deconstructing. Well, maybe that's not true. Maybe it is good. But I think a lot of people, John and I would probably agree that our deconstruction was a lot like that. Was a lot of sort of gradual steps away. And at first it was very much a step away from a concept of God that I found toxic, and I still find toxic. So the first step in that was, well, I have to get rid of that. So I'm not an atheist. I still believe in God. I still love Jesus. And the more down the road that I went, the more of that baggage I jettisoned. I'm at a very, very fluid place, if that makes sense, in my faith. Like, and again, I think for the most part, I still find Jesus really compelling, and most of what he said to be useful, and still relevant. But I have a hard time with with everything else, all the trappings of it and all of the structures that come along with it. And having participated in it for 35 or 40 years, that was tough to untangle, because that was my life for a very, very long time. You know, my kids are struggling with it right now because I'm not the dad who raised them, you know, and I raised, you know, a couple of them to be pretty staunch evangelicals, and they are not happy with me at the moment. Yeah, it is hard. And so we dance around the subject. We don't talk about it too much, but I've got 2 kids who are basically atheists, and I've got 2 who are pretty well established. And matter of fact, my son baited me this weekend into a big fight. So that was fun. I usually bite my tongue. I'm good at that. And then he said something stupid. I just couldn't bite my tongue anymore, and it turned into a big deal. So learning to navigate those waters is difficult as well. I think if nothing else, I mean, you might be thankful you didn't go farther down the road than you did, because it was a little easier to untangle from all of that.
Yeah. That is a big thing that I think about a lot. And especially when I wrote the book and I started getting really active on what was then Twitter, and was, meeting a lot of other, ex-evangelicals. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm finding my people. I'm finding this community who I was told like didn't exist, or they did leave, their lives would go to hell, and now they're all together and forming this beautiful community. This is great. And I remember really being struck by how fortunate I was that I hadn't gotten myself all tangled up, that I hadn't married like the person in my book who I fell in love with, that character, I'll call him the character August, who I was so into. And then he was like, you got too much going on for me. I need someone who's going to do me, not them, And I'm so grateful. I'm so glad that happened now, because how differently would have my life have turned out if, in my brain and me, like I never would have been able to really stay in this. And how, like, I'm really glad that didn't happen. But it does, I do also understand and can see the complications of, the evangelical movement doing what it set out to do, which is to get you not only at your most vulnerable, but get all of you.
Yeah.
And that includes not just you, but everybody connected to you.
Right.
And make it that much harder for you to step away from it. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons too why it's so interesting, the intersection we were just talking about, cults, the intersection between evangelicalism and a cult. And and after I left, I remember just needing to watch so many cult documentaries. I must have watched like 50 cult documentaries.
Yeah, same.
And it's just like, oh my goodness, I felt that, I understand that, I went through that, but not quite like that, but a little different. And what I came to understand as the years went on is that I wanted to call evangelicalism a cult, but by the scholarly definition, I couldn't, because it's too big. It's too pervasive. It's reached its arms into too many aspects of society, that like the only thing that we can really call it is a high control group.
Yeah, for sure.
It's so similar to a cult. It essentially, like, it's just too big to be a cult. And that's the only reason why we can't actually like call it by definition. And that's actually quite scary.
It is. Yeah. I wrote a whole chapter in my book about how evangelicals, and just outlining the cult-like behavior.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
Go ahead,
I was just going to say, all I was going to say is it's interesting because you'll sit in an evangelical church and they will be talking about cults, and they will start listing the things that cults do.
And they're doing all
control
of them.
You. And every single one of them they do, right?
Yeah. One of my favorite is a really funny clip, and it's unintentionally funny, but I don't know if you know who Mike Bickle is. Mike, if you're listening, this is about you. Mike Bickle is the pastor of Kansas City International House of Prayer, which has been the subject of much scandal and weirdness lately. He requires that anyone who attends his supernatural school, it's kind of like Bethel has their supernatural school of ministry. He has this school where he raises, and the whole point of this church is to hasten the end times. They pray 24 hours a day so that, whatever the end times look like, well, Mike has had all these so-called prophetic revelations over the years, and he's committed them all to CDs, and everyone who goes to that school is supposed to really only pay attention to that. Read your Bible, but mostly you're focused in on Mike's prophetic end time stuff. And he was, anyway, all this was to say, I saw him give a short talk about cults, and he started listing all, just exactly like John said, listing off all of the characteristics and how you recognize a cult. And I'm like, you just described yourself. Like IHOP is a cult. Maybe evangelicalism as a whole can't be categorized that way, but I think you could find certain small segments and movements within that movement that you could certainly say, no, you separate people from their families. You require total allegiance from them. You require tons of time and tons of money. You have crazy offbeat doctrines and beliefs that are outside the mainstream. I mean, you start going down the list and it's like, I guess a rose by any other name, but I mean, call it what you want, but I say cult.
Yeah. Campus Christian used to sleep deprive us.
Yeah.
Like when I was that missions trip that, for 10 weeks, I was in Hampton Beach, New Hampshire. They totally sleep deprived us and totally made us a little like bonkers because they made us, be in these Bible studies until like 11, 12 p.m. at night. And then they forced us to get jobs at fast food restaurants that wanted us there at 6 a.m. And so we'd be getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep if we were lucky. And then we'd be working these fast food jobs that were training grounds for evangelizing to people. We had to memorize these Knowing God Personally track booklets. Sometimes we used to have my McDonald's pockets stuffed with them because I was supposed to be going and sharing with everyone. And it was, evangelize to the fast food workers and get your practice in now because you're going to have other jobs, like corporate jobs, whether you go and, you work in a big office in New York City, or, you come and do ministry with us like full time. You're going to have other jobs and you're going to need to be doing this. We definitely, the sleep deprivation aspect I always find very interesting. And that was when I was at my peak indoctrinated. I was so indoctrinated at that point in time. I came off that missions trip and I moved right to New York City and I was like, we're going to convert the whole city.
We're taking New York, taking it over for Jesus.
Yeah. I was like, set up shop in a hellhole. This is me.
Oh, man.
Put them all.
John, you were going to say something. I cut you off,
I was just going to say, and you write in your book that there's a time where they want to, I guess it's Kate, tells you that maybe you should stop talking to your mom as much because of potentially they're leading you astray because they're not really believing the same thing you're believing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. My mom, of course, had her own role to play in all of this and, tough stuff that happened, in my childhood. However, my mother was very upset about this. So was my father. My father was like, my father had to convince himself that he was okay with me being evangelical by saying, I'm just glad you're not on the back of some guy's motorcycle. I'm just glad. But he told us all, like, he would say it all out loud because he also has no filter. I'm a lot like him in that sense. Say all this stuff out loud. Like, okay, Dad. But my mom was so against it. And my mother did not like Kate. She did not like her one bit. And my mom was right. Like, looking back on it, I'm like, that's such a complicated relationship that I have with my mother and that I had with my mother at that point in time. But, where her motherly instincts didn't really, kind of failed her in some other aspects. Her motherly instincts were very protective of me then in like a very correct way. And Kate was just like, I have more power over you at this point in time. And I'm going to exercise that and tell you that you need to start talking to her less. And so I definitely started ghosting my family more as a result of that.
That tactic is culty. It's just more subtly done in the event. We're not told. I was never told to disassociate from my family, but I was told that I should not necessarily associate so much with people who didn't believe the same as I did. And then you get that bad morals, corrupt, good, whatever it is. Whatever. There's a proverb in there somewhere, and so maybe they never came out and said, "Hey, don't talk to this person or hang," but the message was still pretty clear. We weren't supposed to date girls that weren't Christians because we didn't want to be unevenly yoked. In fact, I gave John hell about that when he when he first got together with his now wife. I hope we've forgiven each other by now, or you've forgiven me by now. But I was a dick because I was fully evangelical, know-it-all 20-year-old or 19-year-old even. I don't know what it was, 18. I was a dipshit. And lecturing John about, you shouldn't be dating this girl who's an atheist. You're unevenly yoked. But that's the sort of, does that make sense? My sense is that it's not quite as dramatic as maybe you might find in, say, Scientology, where they legit cut you off and like, hey, those people are enemies of the church. But the message is the same.
Yeah, it is the same. And it's so much easier for it to spread that way. Because I think that we also kind of like, by nature, we all minimize things a little bit. Nobody wants to admit that they're talking to a person who's like totally got like very wrong-headed ideas and notions about, no one wants to automatically demonize someone else. It's like, we really don't want to do that by nature, the people that we're meeting and we're looking at. So I think that because of the fact that it's so much more subtle, it spreads so much more pervasively. And again, vulnerable people are so much more at risk of like, falling into it because it's so subtle and the game is so long and so slow. I know somebody who I remember hearing, actually, I heard about this person. There was a person who, she lived in New York City. She was very openly gay, very, very much a lesbian. And she became a part of Tim Keller's Redeemer Presbyterian Church.
Wow.
And he, she went in, and Tim Keller was, when he was alive, he was this essential Yoda of a man, this Yoda pastor who would like get up on stage, and he was so cerebral, and he would just play these mind tricks on you. And he would sound so compelling and so interesting. And he wouldn't even, talk. He really saved all of the stuff about salvation and what that really meant for like deeper conversations. And him and his followers and his church did that so well that this lesbian became a part of a community there, like a part of one of those like apartment home group Bible study things. And she was in it for 4 years before they told her, it's actually not good for you to be a lesbian. You probably shouldn't be a lesbian. That's not, no, like you should be. And that was 4 years of her doing that. And this had become her social group in the city. These had become her friends. Like these had become like the people that were her family essentially. And it's very hard to turn away when that happens. Yeah. And so again, it's, this is how the movement gets people to be involved, how it gets people to give their time and their energy and their money, how it gains power, because that's ultimately what this is about. This is all about power, and it's how they get people to vote a certain way.
Yeah.
Ultimately, at the end of the day. So yeah, and what's so funny is that Campus Crusade is just one small cog in the wheel. They're such a well-oiled machine themselves with so many different cogs, but like micro cogs, but they are a cog in a much larger wheel of this stuff in the United States and abroad, essentially.
Well, there's this idea that you have to believe rightly before you belong fully. And if you don't believe the way that that church or that organization is expecting you to believe, then you might belong on the front end because they have to get you in, but you don't actually belong fully. And I've seen this happen time and again, where I never, I really do follow Jesus. I believe that Jesus' way is so healing and life-giving to humanity. And whenever I look at the way of Jesus, he never required people to believe fully. And he didn't even really clearly project his beliefs fully. He just included people, and whatever they were going to experience happened in the context of a loving community that wasn't kicking people out because they didn't follow whatever rule was supposed to be in place. And I don't know like what that means for us as people today, because it feels so like if you don't follow these rules, then you don't actually get to be included any longer, or you're ostracized, or you're ghosted or left out in some way, cold-shouldered. And I'm curious, within all of your experiences of growing up with this cafeteria Catholic, being brought into this very evangelical world that almost like really indoctrinated in so many ways in a cult like existence, to now coming out on the other side where you feel like you've had to break up with God in some ways. What has been filling your soul? And do you feel like there's been something that's like continued forth throughout your entire walk from being a child until now, that you can like see this continuation regardless of influences that have come your way? Or is it different throughout each season of your life that fills your soul?
Yeah, I think it's been different throughout each season of my life, definitely. And, I mean, I guess maybe if there is one thing that has actually filled my soul, I think now I'm thinking about it, it probably has been writing.
Yeah.
Ever since I was a very young child, I remember I was in kindergarten, and I won this like author's tea award because I wrote a story that had a very clear beginning, middle, and end at like the age of 5. Like it had like literally like a turning point where I drew a light bulb, and I was like, wait, it was called My Brother's Birthday Party, and it was about how my brother wasn't letting me play with any of his friends at his birthday party. And then I drew a light bulb, and I was like, but wait, I can roll down the hill by myself. I can play badminton by myself. I can do all these things by myself and have fun. And I got this like little award when I was 5, and they were like, she understands like a general story structure at a very young age. This is incredible. And after that, I think I was really, and I realized how much I love stories. I think all little kids love stories, but because I think I was encouraged, I just continued to love stories, and I've never stopped loving stories. And I truly feel like when I am writing, I am communicating with something larger than myself. I don't know what that is. I don't know if there's any real word for it, but I do feel like I'm tapping into, I don't know, something that's maybe floating around my head a little bit, or somewhere else. And it is in those moments I feel like I'm using a different kind of energy. I feel like there's, it's just, if I were ever to get woo-woo, it would be truly woo-woo. It would be over that stuff. That is when I feel like my soul is being fed. And when I am not writing anything, when I am not tapping into that energy, I don't feel as good. I just don't.
I can totally, man, the way that you wrote this story, like it's really a memoir in a lot of ways, God's Ex-Girlfriend, but just, I felt so drawn to your story. I felt like I was included in it. Like so many times I'm reading and I'm just like nodding my head. It's just like the way that you paint the picture. It's not just a thing of facts. Like this happened and that happened and this happened, and you're in it the whole time. Like, it's like you are exposing yourself through your writing, and it's very engaging. You are an amazing storyteller, truly.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know how you remembered all those details, but you're so detailed. I mean, it was just beautiful. So I really appreciate it.
I actually went through a whole outline phase where I just wrote everything down. Because the thing about writing a memoir too, and writing nonfiction in general, which I don't actually prefer, I prefer fiction because it's just a different world building experience. But writing nonfiction, you really have to figure out what to include and what not to include. Because there's so much other stuff I could have included and did and was edited out at different, by different editors at different times, throughout the editing and submission and the publishing process. But yeah, it is, I do feel like that, that transporting and that honesty also I felt was really, really important. There are definitely times where I was like, I'm sure people could judge me for this, but I'm going to write it anyway. I was like, because what am I writing this for if I'm not like exposing myself to judgment, So it was a very, this one in particular was a very cathartic. I felt like I had to get that out of my system. I wasn't able to write anything else. I had to get that out.
Have you been working on anything else since?
Yes, I have. Now I'm working on a novel, and I have a short story that's probably going to be coming out with a local press around me up here. I'm very interested in just women's experiences in general. I think it might be partially since becoming a mom. I'm very interested in writing about that. And I'm also very interested in this is going to sound ridiculous, alternate universes and just like the whole, quantum mechanics and the idea that we're like, we're in one timeline, but like beside us are like 1,000 other timelines and 1,000 other possibilities, sort of like everything everywhere all at once type thoughts. And so I'm writing a novel right now about a woman who meets her double, and they're both living very, very, very different lives, but they gotta figure out a way to come together, or else bad things are going to happen. And then I just wrote a short story about a woman who sort of like enters another, a dreamlike state and realizes that she can just transfer her pregnancy between people with her belly button. Pregnancy just goes, and then she gets a little break. And it's all about her experience doing that, and how everybody in the universe is like, that's a bad thing to do. Don't do pregnancy transfers. It's unnatural. Like, what is natural? Like, what does that mean? And so, sort of, it's kind of a story about not being able to win in a lot of ways. So I'm still writing. I mean, I have young children at this point now. So my life after I wrote God's Ex-Girlfriend has kind of, I feel like that was a very much a coming of age story in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And now I'm in this like different phase of adulthood. But I am kind of fighting for my writing time now because my kids are so little. So get up early in the morning. My husband changes the diapers while I wait for literally 30 minutes. Like literally 30 minutes. Now I have figured out a way to just like if I get 3 paragraphs down, I'm like, a little adds up.
Hey, it's a win.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow, very cool. Well, I can't wait to see some of that stuff whenever it comes out.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the belly button thing. That sounds. I'm always interested in people who come up with unique ideas.
Right.
My favorite writers always surprise me with something and go, "Oh, okay." Maybe it's just a lack of creativity. I recognize like, "Oh, that's a really unique thing. That's very cool." In a million years, I wouldn't have thought of that. How does that play out? Like how does? Okay, now you have me intrigued, and all of our audience probably too going, "Okay, where's this belly button story coming in?" Because I'd like to transfer other things besides pregnancy. Could you transfer like gallstones or no? Just kidding.
I got a really bad stomach bug right now.
Yeah,
here we go.
I had a really bad acid trip. He's come back. I'll just transfer that over to this guy.
Well, there's people that are out there. There's people that are out there. They're like the pastors of the world or something, that they take whatever burden you're having and they hold it for a little bit and then they give it back.
Well, there's that old, I don't know if it's an Irish, anyway, the concept of the sin eater.
The sin eater, yeah.
Remember that? I don't think it's Irish. I think it's, but anyway, but that idea of like somebody,
Celtic.
Is it Celtic? Okay. But somebody who literally takes on your sin and becomes the bearer of that burden. But that's cool. But I can't, but to do that to somebody involuntarily might be bad. I don't know.
Yeah,
I got a lot of bad shit in here. I'm going to give it to you for a bit so I can sleep at night.
That thing where you're like, I'm going to give it to you, but here's the bad news.
All the bad news. I'm just a shill for old Bruce Willis movies. It's so campy. It's so silly, but there's a lot of stuff and it's actually memorable. But
I really love it.
Goldie Hawn getting whacked with a shovel and like having to like turn her head around. But well, just for funsies too. Bruce Willis is this mousy little pushover plastic surgeon, and he is enlisted by them to be the person that upkeeps their physical bodies as they deteriorate, even though they're immortal. So you have to watch this movie. It's fantastic. Or maybe,
oh my goodness,
or maybe you'll watch it and go, that was dumb as hell. But it's an interesting concept. But talk about that. I know we mentioned it early in the beginning, the Campus Crusade for Christ using data. That was an interesting thing that was in your, what's the story there?
So they ended up, this is years after I, had already left. Yeah, I got involved in this documentary and found out that, they essentially were collecting people's mental health information, it seemed, and targeting them that way through, evangelism, I guess. I didn't get all the details of exactly how the mechanics of this were working, but yes, it had something to do with Cambridge Analytica and people's mental health data, and then compounding all of that and coming up with profiles for people and people's names and addresses and stuff, and knowing that maybe these people would be mentally vulnerable to the gospel.
Wow. That's not predatory or nothing.
No, it's not. It's not like any of this isn't predatory, right? Like, it's all like really messed up, And at the end of the day, that was what probably one of the biggest teachings of evangelism, period, in the movement, was to find, people's pain and exploit it. And they didn't use that term, exploit.
Yeah, of course not.
It was Jesus, which is exploiting it, like, ultimately.
Right. Yeah. Well, we were raised. I mean, I spent a good deal of my life in the evangelical church, and what you're talking about rings so true. What we thought was kindness, which was, well, we're just gonna have this really wide open door, and that meant that preaching on Sundays was going to be non-confrontational. It was going to be very
seeker sensitive.
Yeah, very seeker sensitive was the term for a while. Then we moved away from that. My pastor liked to call it the red door treatment or the red carpet treatment. So we wanted to have anybody could come in. The sermon was going to be something practical, something sort of 12-steppy kind of something useful, and they were always that. There was never anything But meanwhile, a lot of the stuff that would have been controversial or might have sent somebody running for the doors was held off for, like you said, well, these would be for deeper conversations. Let's get them into small groups. Let's get them into some other relationships where now we can talk about hell. And now we can talk about how, by the way, you're gay and you need to stop that. Or any number of, 100 other things. But Sunday mornings were very, very, they just were very vanilla. Like, let's get you a good worship experience. Let's make sure there's a good rocking band on the stage. Let's preach a message that is, useful and uplifting and encouraging. And down the road, we'll get you. We'll reveal some of these other things and at that point, you might be indoctrinated enough to go, well, I guess that's the way it is. I guess if I don't do this, I guess people who don't, and they can get you to believe them like incredible things. And one of my favorite atheists likes to say, if they can get you to believe absurdities, they can get you to commit atrocities. And there were absurd things we were asked to believe. And then there were atrocious things we were actually asked to do. And that predatory thing, to some listening might not think anything of it. That is one of the most horrendous affronts to the gospel I can think of, to come to somebody with bad intentions, and even if they are couched in good intentions, but we were always told to make a friend so that we could then bring a friend to Christ. So the ulterior motive always wasn't, friendship wasn't the primary motivation. It was a means to an end, and that's manipulative and predatory and downright shitty. Because if they don't accept the gospel, I'm supposed to cut ties and move on to the next thing.
You're supposed to accept that God has just not chosen them. If you're following a Calvinist.
Well, they have reprobate minds and they've been turned over to their own whatever. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
My inner Calvinist for a second.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, I had a hard time with Calvinism. That was definitely some spiritual meat that I had a hard time swallowing.
Yeah.
I was pretty off about it, honestly. When I first found out, I was like, I'm Arminian all the way. But then everyone in my Campus Crusade crew was Calvinist, and they were like, "That's just not right, Beth. It's just not right." And I felt like I had to yet again, just kind of give in. And that's the thing too, is that, it's a real mind fuck, because they do this thing to you where it's like one of the first teachings, probably very early on, I feel like in the movement and in the journey, is that you don't have the ability to choose the right thing for yourself because you're so selfish and you're so filled with sin that, it's like your mind, you almost don't have the ability to make a good choice. Therefore, you need to let us make a choice for you via this framework. And we've laid out the map. We've come up with this over like courses of like hundreds of years and stuff. We know what to do, and come to us, the pastors, and we'll help make that choice for you because you don't have the ability to do it. We'll pray on it. We'll look at the Bible. We'll do all of this stuff. You don't have the ability to make a good decision yourself. And that also, really, and then I felt like when I was confronted with these ideas, like, again, Calvinism to me was actually a horrible idea. The idea that God, chooses some people and doesn't choose others, like that God himself is the one that damns people to hell. And it's not, about people making that choice themselves, that God chose it all before time and before you were born. And I was like, that's gross. I hate that. I literally hate that idea. I think that that's so disgusting. And that's not why I'm involved in this. But because I had been taught that my own reaction was evil, potentially, and that therefore, maybe this wasn't Jesus in me feeling this way. Maybe it was me, which is me is sin, my sinful nature. I cannot trust myself. I cannot trust my mind or my heart because I'm just so riddled with sin. Therefore, maybe I need to give this awful idea a chance. And that is
Yeah,
it's so rough. It's so rough.
I'm nodding because, what you're saying is exactly right. I tell you what, I'm just so glad that you took the time to hang out with us. Thank you for the book. I think your book is a gift, and I think I really do. The writing is impressive. The story is compelling, and I think it has a ton of relevance, especially as we go forward over the next. It seems like it's been a year already, but it's only been like 3 months of the. Holy shit! It's been the longest year of my life, and it's been like 3 months. So I'm looking at this point to any anchor, any port in the storm that says, okay, there's a voice of reason out there. We haven't all lost our ever-loving minds. And so for that, I think your book is more than useful. I think it's needed. So I appreciate that, and wish you all the best luck with that. And John, Bethany, you guys have anything to add before we wrap it up?
Just same thing. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and talk with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for writing this book and giving us the space to talk with you about it.
Of course. No, thank you so much for having me on. This was great, and it was wonderful to meet y'all.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch. where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.